completion percentage record. Wow. Drew Brees goes 29 for 30, 307 yards, 4 touchdowns. Just a phenomenal performance. Michael Thomas continues his incredible season as well. 12 catches for 128 yards and a touchdown on 12 targets, of course. Brees only had one incomplete pass, so what are you going to do about that? This is the same Saints team, by the way, that gave up 48 points last week, and they give up 7 this week. Football is a little weird sometimes. The Saints, with the win, become the 4th team in the NFC with 11 wins, joining Green Bay, Seattle, San Francisco. It is a top-heavy NFC this year. And then over in the East, Dallas and Philadelphia kind of having a slap fight to see who will take the NFC East. They're just two kids in grade school just kind of flapping their arms at each other. Both at 7-7. If Philly wins out, they get it. But they'd be 9-7. San Francisco already has 11 wins, and at the moment would be a wild card. Yikes. Kevin Kistner in the booth is the biggest Peyton Manning fan I know. Are you okay, man? Are you okay, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, Drew Brees did do it in more games, so it took him longer to do it. But
okay.
And then, but I will say this: it's going to be fun these last 2 games because it's going to go Brees, Brady, Brees, Brady, Brees, Brady, and see who comes out with it at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it is going to be.
I mean, every
back
week
and forth,
they're going to go,
obviously, right?
Every week every game is going to be like, all right, well now he's the passing leader.
Guess you're not going to be stopping the games to recognize the.
Can you imagine that?
Otherwise, you'll be doing it every week.
Every other possession.
What happens when they're both playing at the same time of day? Yeah, Brees is now. Brady is, by the way, at 538, and so he's a few back, but this does seem like it's not quite over yet. And I don't know if either one of these guys are going to be done after this year or not. On top of that. But an extraordinary game with history there. Tom Brady tweeted out, "Congrats, Drew. Couldn't be more deserving. Passing Peyton in anything is an incredible achievement, and your records will be tough to beat, but it's worth trying," he said with the wink emoji.
Who do you think is going to be the guy, let's just say 15 years from now? Because we know someone within 15 years will probably break the records.
It's Mahomes if he stays healthy.
It's Mahomes.
I think so.
Not Drew Lock.
We haven't seen enough there yet, I don't think.
But yeah, it's got to be Mahomes, right?
Yeah, when you look at how quickly he's racked up the stats, I think you probably have to go in that direction and think that he'll be the guy to do it if anybody does. I mean, you figured that his rookie year was impressive. It was his first full year when he played. Yeah, I think that he's got to be the guy. The offense is right. I think they're not going to move away from Andy Reid either as long as Mahomes is doing his thing. They're going to keep that. So already Mahomes in 29 games has 73 touchdowns. I mean,
that's
yikes.
insane.
Yeah. And he's having a really down year this year. He only has 23. He had 50 last year. So I think that's got to be the guy looking forward. We'll see how it goes. And who knows? I mean, there's so many good quarterbacks coming out of college. The offenses are wide open. There's more passing than there ever was before. I mean, if you were to normalize the stats, you take nothing away from Drew Brees or Brady or Manning, but you go back into the 80s. It's not as if Dan Marino and John Elway and Joe Montana were chumps either. And they walked away with the records at the time they left, and they've been left in the dust. And so you almost have to, I get it, in stats you just accumulate and accumulate and accumulate, but it becomes difficult as the stats become a little more skewed to find out where all these guys sort of fit historically. It's almost as if you have to do a normalized stat where if you say, okay, back in whatever, 1986, the league average starting quarterback threw 18 touchdowns a year. And so if you threw 26, you were, a third again more than the average. And then if you would equate that to today where the average quarterback's throwing 26, 27, then that would be, in your 30s. So you can normalize the stats, but it doesn't really matter in the end. It's about who threw the most touchdowns. And it's Drew Brees. And this is amazing because he has had now this game with the 4 touchdown passes and no picks. This was the 25th time Drew Brees has done that in his career. In 25 different games. 4 touchdowns, 0 picks. I mean, that is amazing. So, there's nothing really to complain about here. It was fun to watch. This team is fun to watch. I have no idea what's going to go on in the NFC playoffs. 4 11-win teams already with 2 weeks to go. And Minnesota's at 10. So, this is it's so top heavy in the NFC. It's a little ridiculous, quite frankly, because you have the bad teams. Over in the AFC, you look at it, Cincinnati's 1-13, Miami's 3-11. The Jets, the Chargers, the Broncos, and Jacksonville are all 5-9. And then Oakland and Cleveland are 6-8, along with Indy, 6-8. And then everybody else 8-6. But it's pretty clumped together. When, with the exception of 2 teams, 5-9 is the worst. Not that bad. And then you go over to the NFC. Washington's at 3-11. So are the Giants. Detroit's 3-10-1. Arizona's 4-9-1. And that's 4 different teams that are that bad or worse. And then you have the 4 teams with 11 wins. So NFC is top heavy, but it also makes for some fun competition because I don't think anyone who's looking at it really knows. How much better are the Packers than the Saints? Do we know? Do we know how much better Seattle is than Minnesota? You kind of don't. And so that's going to be fun. In only a couple weeks, we'll be talking about playoffs. And while the Denver Broncos won't be in it, there will be some fun things to discuss. There's going to be some terrific matchups. There's terrific teams there. And the statistical performances are amazing. And they're just going to, like Kevin said, they're just going to keep coming. Brees is going to extend his own record, or Brady's going to break it. And then Brees will break it back. Then Brady will break it back over and over and over again. The interesting thing, though, is when you look at the 2 guys, Brady's having a tough time this year. And I don't know. I would not say the wheels have come off Tom Brady, but he has just not had some of it's his offense, yes. But he just hasn't had those big games. In 3 of the last 4 weeks, he's only broken 190 yards passing once. So I think Brees has a chance to maybe run away and hide with this a little bit over the course of the season. But it's fun to keep track of. Manning's going to be 3rd by this time next week, because those 2 guys are going to keep going ahead of him. The Broncos now at 5-9 fall to the Chiefs 23-3. If you were listening yesterday, you caught me hosting the fan football postgame in for Sandy Clough. That was a lot of fun. It would have been more fun if the Broncos had won, but I appreciate everyone who joined into the program there. The Broncos were, by and large, pretty awful. But it wasn't as if they were some sort of, it wasn't like it was entirely mistake-ridden. A very bad interception by Drew Lock. Otherwise, it wasn't tons of mistakes that really hurt them. And I think when you look at this game, it's the fact that the Broncos simply aren't as good as the Chiefs. This was a team that didn't play its best overall game. And it really became a problem because they are a long way away from the team they're chasing. We'll talk about that next. The Broncos fall to 5-9. Their chances at the playoffs blow away in the snow in Kansas City. And looking at the challenges the Broncos had, and they were all over the field. Patrick Mahomes had an extraordinary game, completing 79.4% of his passes against the Broncos defense that statistically at least is okay. Going to tight ends, he completed 86.7% of his passes to Travis Kelce and Blake Bell. The Broncos' inability to cover tight ends still is a problem. And it's a problem that, even though I think he's been very, very helpful to them, and a great find, Alexander Johnson can't help with. Great in run support, very talented guy. And I think a keeper. But he can't do anything against the tight ends, just like nobody else on the Broncos really can. And this is a big-time challenge in the AFC West. For the Broncos, you have Travis Kelce. He's not going anywhere. You have Hunter Henry with the Chargers. And Darren Waller in Oakland is one of the breakout players of the season. So this is something Denver has to take a look at in the offseason. And granted, I understand. Tight ends are a mismatch, by and large. Very few teams absolutely shut down tight ends. But Denver is extraordinarily poor at covering them. Some of this, I guess I look at it, and it was interesting hosting the fan football postgame yesterday, as fans were understandably frustrated. But looking at it, this isn't a game anyone expected them to win. They were 10-point underdogs. Every single host on this station picked the Chiefs to win. I'm not really sure that losing to the Chiefs at Arrowhead in December is necessarily that much of a shame. It certainly isn't a surprise to me. But I don't know if you're the Broncos, you look at it and go, oh my gosh, we have to reevaluate everything. No, you don't. This wasn't a game you should have expected to win. Would you have liked to have shown a little better? Yes. Would you have thought that maybe the weather would have been an equalizer? Yes. So you maybe did expect it to go a little bit better than that. But it didn't. And you have to look at what happened and say, all right, what are the problems we could fix and what are the problems we can't fix? One of the problems they can't fix in this game is they're just not as talented. Their quarterback is not better. Their receiving core, when you consider tight end and wide receiver, is not better. Maybe their running backs are better than the Chiefs. But otherwise, I'm trying to figure out what part is better. Chiefs' offensive line is better than Denver. The Chiefs' defensive line is better than Denver's. The Chiefs' linebackers, at least as they are today, with no Bradley Chubb, are better. And since the Broncos really only have one cornerback that they can count on, you could argue that better there too. Special teams on the whole, probably better. And Kansas City's coaching is better as well. So maybe the running backs. They really weren't yesterday. Broncos ran 15 times for 52 yards, a 3.5 yard per carry average. Kansas City averaged 3.7. So I'm not sure where the Broncos are better than the Chiefs. I know a lot of places where they're undoubtedly not as good. So you can look at it a couple ways. You can go, oh my gosh, what an embarrassing game. Or you can look at it and say, hey, you know what? Just matching up rosters, 1 to 53. Why would you think Denver would win this game? They were a 5-win team. Kansas City was a 9-win team. And that 9-win team, by the way, when you look at the 9 wins they got, and knowing that Patrick Mahomes was gone for part of this year, it feels like the 9 wins is sort of underachieving for the Chiefs at this point. So I think that for the Broncos, you almost have to let this one go a bit. There are a few things that are concerning that I think need to be addressed. And some of them have to do with the coaching staff. I think the roster did what the roster can do. Locke was hassled all game long. Kansas City had 10 listed quarterback hits on him, as well as 2 sacks. And he was hit more than 10 times. They were all over him all game long. Broncos' offensive line could do essentially nothing to protect Drew Lock. Now, there were also a lot of drops. Cortland Sutton had 2 or 3, and not the one in the end zone. That was a great play by Tyrann Mathieu to knock it out of his hands. But Sutton had drops. Andrew Beck had a drop. Lindsey had a drop that the pass hit him right between the 3 and the 0. So Locke finished 18 for 40, but he could have finished over 50. Not that that would have been a big deal. You wouldn't be going, oh boy, wow, 52% completion, yay. It's okay if you're not impressed by that. Locke had a bad game. And his decision to throw the pass into the end zone across his body and across opposite his body and across the entire field was a terrible decision. On the bright side, following the game, you heard him say that he understood, said something to the effect of, I tried to force it and it bit me in the butt. Which, again, when you talk about what's going on with Drew Lock at this stage of his development, of what the Broncos are trying to do in the evaluation process, look, if you're looking for a silver lining, that's not bad right there. That's pretty good. You want him to make these errors now when it's cheap. You want him to make these mistakes when they don't matter. It's not a playoff chase. Nothing like that's happening. So have him make the mistakes. Have him learn from the mistakes. What was important is right off the bat, you didn't hear Locke go, oh, well, I thought I could get it. He said flat out. Flat out. In so many words, dumb play. My fault. I have to be smarter. I can't make that at the NFL level. Well, good. That's what you want to hear. And you want Locke to make those mistakes so he can come back with that kind of answer and then make sure he doesn't do it again. If he doesn't do it again, hey, then you're starting to see something. You can really start to believe. But I do look at this game to a certain extent. The Broncos were swept in the season series with a combined score of 53-9. They're just not in the same zip code as the Chiefs here, okay? The Chiefs are basically better across the board. So you go on the road in one of the toughest places to play under the best of circumstances, tougher in December. And then you have a bad performance in snowy weather with your rookie quarterback's third start. Okay, well, c'est la vie. I think the Broncos almost to a certain extent have to look at this and just toss it. Throw it away. Doesn't necessarily matter. You weren't going to make the playoffs. This is about evaluation. You got to evaluate some things. We'll break down a lot of what those are over the course of tonight. And it includes a couple places you might not expect. The one unit that I thought the Broncos might have that's a little better than Kansas City, the running backs, that was not a good unit on Sunday. And there's room to talk about the coaching as well. The play calling. And maybe not the side of the ball play calling you're used to hearing about. The Colorado Avalanche fell tonight to the St. Louis Blues, 5-2 on the road. We'll have our Avalanche insider, Adrian Dater, join us from St. Louis to break it all down next. The Colorado Avalanche had a 2-1 lead in the game, but it didn't work out. They lose to the St. Louis Blues. Joining us now, our Avalanche insider, Adrian Dater, brought to you by Bud Light. And AD, look, the Blues have beaten them 6 straight times. They just have a problem with these guys, don't they?
Yeah, a lot of teams do, Sean. But the Avs do have a historically bad time in St. Louis. I mean, it used to be that the Avs, it's funny, they used to beat the Blues quite a bit, even when they're in their really bad years. But it seems like when they've gotten better, they're back to losing again. I think they've had a token win or two here and there in St. Louis the last few years, but it's it was the same kind of game tonight. They always lose here. Kind of competitive for a while, then there's a couple mistakes made, and boom, the game's over. It just it was a disappointing game. They had a lead 2-1 with less than 2 minutes to go in the second period. That's a good place to be as a road team, and one high stick by Nazem Kadri put the Blues on the power play for 4 minutes. When you got a double minor and you're trying to kill it, if you're going to get scored on a double minor, you want to do it after. You want it to have it happen after the first 2 minutes are up. Otherwise, the clock resets right back to 2 minutes, and you get another power play. The 2 minutes. Let's say you score within any time frame of that first 2 minutes, it goes back to 2. Boom, they get another one, and the Avs never recovered tonight from that.
They did get Philip Grubauer back, so I mean that part is good news, even though the game was not very well received, as it turns out. How did he look to you? Was it particularly a problem with Grubauer? Did he look rusty?
I don't know if rusty is the word. I thought he looked good and quick at times and made some nice saves, and then there was kind of a baffling couple bad goals that made you think, well, geez, how did that go in all of a sudden? He's been making these other saves. I thought the David Perron goal that tied it on the power play at 2-2 was seemingly a pretty, it was a good shot, but it seemed like it was plenty of room, time, and space for Grubauer to see it, and he didn't. The fourth goal by St. Louis, the giveaway by Zadorov to Jordan Kyrou, who then steals the puck at center ice, goes all the way around the net, around Ryan Graves, Grubauer, who didn't react in time enough, and Zadorov, who gave the puck away in the first place, and just watched him put it in on a wraparound, was the worst goal of the night by all. Zadorov was the main culprit, but Grubauer just seemingly lost sight of the play too, and that was a big, big goal. So up and down night for Grubauer. Look, I mean, the way Francouz has been playing lately, we may be having the classic goaltender controversy here, Sean. Maybe. We'll see. We'll see who's going to start that next game in Chicago, because Francouz has been playing great. Grubauer didn't, don't think he was the problem tonight necessarily, but he, there's going to be questions going forward. Maybe Frankie's edging him out for a starter job. We'll see.
And obviously, you want the best guy in net and you want the hot hand in net. But if you run into this spot where it's another bit of a goalie controversy, and the Avs have gone through this before in recent years, obviously, is there any way that's a good thing for the team?
Oh, I always think competition's good, internal competition. I don't like a team that's all squared away and doesn't have anything to worry about as far as guys pushing each other. So, I think it's okay. I know that Grubauer is a prideful guy and is not going to want to give up that starting, status that he has, number one guy status. He's worked hard for it. And I don't think he, deserves to have it taken away from him necessarily right now. But, it may be a situation, though, where if you're Jared Bednar and you're wanting to win that division, you're going to go with the hottest guy all the time. You're not necessarily going to go with just a set schedule, maybe. I don't know. But, if Francouz is lights out, let's say he plays tomorrow, next game in Chicago, Wednesday night, and he's lights out, then I think it's going to be a little more difficult for Bednar to make his decisions on who's the starter from there on in. I mean, if Francis falters or something, then that'll make it easier for him to go back to Grubauer. But if he doesn't, Grubauer may be the one who's sitting for a little bit more.
On Wednesday, when they play in Chicago, it'll be the end of an abbreviated road trip, but a road trip at which neither Erik Johnson nor Cale Makar made it on the trip. How close are either of those guys to coming back and helping the Avs?
It's a bit of a mystery as far as Makar and exactly how close he is. The latest is that he may be ready for Thursday's game at home. But I don't know. Judging by Avs history, I'd be a little skeptical of that too. I don't know if he's. The problem is he's just not shooting any pucks or taking any contact of late. So he's got to get that shoulder fully healed, I guess. And I don't think it's anything serious, but we're let's see. We'll this coming Saturday, I believe, will be 2 weeks. That he's out. Maybe I'm already past that level. I'm losing my mind on the dates sometimes, Sean.
Well, they don't let you know what the injuries are and when they are.
Was it a week and a half ago?
I think that's right.
Okay. The game in Boston, it's a week and a half, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, the game in Boston was on the 7th.
Okay, so regardless, he's going to miss Wednesday's game too. Then we're coming up near the weekend. A couple of weeks he's going to miss with this thing. It wasn't a minor little nothing thing. So Erik Johnson, I think, is getting closer. He's got a more firm timetable on things. He's got an injury that I think they know exactly how it heals and when it's going to be done. So he's practicing more and more. I think he'll be back. I would say by I'll say next week. Maybe we'll see if he sheds that pumpkin jersey come Thursday or something. Thursday, Friday practices. That maybe we can pencil him in this weekend or something. But I don't know. As you know, and as fans know, the Avs always seem to take that extra few days of erring on the side of caution before they put guys back in the lineup, and that's probably going to be the same way here.
He is Adrian Dater. Follow him on Twitter at @ADater and at ColoradoHockeyNow.com. AD, appreciate it. We'll catch you Wednesday and see if they can get right against the Blackhawks.
We'll catch you. Yep, I'll be in the Windy City, Sean, and hopefully not being blown away or anything in the Windy City. But we'll catch you there.
All right, thanks. Take care. That is Adrian Dater, for courtesy of our friends at Bud Light, the official beer sponsor of the Colorado Avalanche. And I this game, look, you can't really worry about it too much. I get it, but it is a long season, and I know that's a cliche. But the truth of the matter is, the Avs have won 8 of their last 10, and you go lose to the best team in the West in their barn. You're missing your 2 best defensemen. These things are sort of bound to happen. So I think you don't really look at it and say this is going to be a huge issue. This is just kind of one of those games. Out of 82 games, they're going to have their own narrative. They're going to have their own story. And in this one, the Avs were beaten by an outstanding team, went on the road. That's going to happen. And it's bizarre, the sort of situation that the Avs and the Blues have. The Avs have only won 3 games over the St. Louis Blues since, get this, 2011. The Blues are 17-3 against the Avalanche since 2000. In their last 20, since 2011, 3 wins. That's absolutely bonkers. They're a good team, obviously. They're a great team. But that's just sort of weird, fluky stuff. And I don't think if you're an Avs fan, you worry about it too much. What you hope is you start seeing guys like Cale Makar and Erik Johnson get healthy again. The rest of it will likely take care of itself. The Broncos facing their loss. What do you take away from it? What did Von Miller take away from it? You have never heard Von Miller speak to the media in the way he did yesterday after the game. We'll react to that next. Following the Broncos' 23-3 loss yesterday, Broncos linebacker Von Miller was very, very disheartened and disappointed after the game. And the way that he talked about his own personal situation, I think, became a bit of the story. And for a Broncos team that, look, Von Miller's had headbutting with John Elway here and there. Sometimes it's been resolved. Sometimes it's been kind of sitting around in different spots for sure. Don't really know where everything's going to go with it, but Vaughn sounded more than a little down, and they didn't really leave much to the imagination. But as to what he referred to, that's a little more complicated. Let me hear just a couple of comments from Von Miller. Miller obviously really, really down. And like you said, getting ahead of himself and talking about more than just this game. But I think to an extent what you're hearing is this is the moment where I think Von Miller even discussed it himself. Sometimes athletes start to realize their football mortality. Von Miller's had extraordinary success in the early going. But since they won Super Bowl 50, the Broncos have won only 40% of their games and have not yet gone to the playoffs. And you account for the last 3 years in particular, and it's bad. There's no other way around it. So this is a team that is 20. Look, they're in a bad spot. And maybe they win. I think they will. I think they actually find a way to win the last 2 games of the year. And maybe that gets them to 7-9. And you can make the argument that they've gone from 5 wins to 6 wins to 7 wins, and they're on track. But I think what Miller's indicating is at 30 years old, that's not quick enough improvement for him. And the further he gets away from the glory days in his earlier part of his career, the harder it is for them to get back. Talked about his time with Chris Harris, who is expected to leave as a free agent. I think Miller looks at a strange spot here that a lot of athletes look into and realize there's more days behind than there are ahead. And how do I want to spend them? I do believe Miller when he says that he wants to be a Bronco for his career. I do believe he values that. I do believe that he understands that if he stays here for his entire career, Von Miller may end up being one of the top 3 players to ever play for the Denver Broncos. maybe even the top 2. A Hall of Famer, a Super Bowl champ. What else do you want? But this is a tough spot for Miller. And I think there's been a little overreaction. I think some fans take a look at it and say, oh, well, that's it. He doesn't want to be. I don't know if he doesn't want to be here. And I don't want to speak for him. But I do take a look at it and think that this is calling out a few things. And what he's basically been saying is, he took the team out to dinner. That famously happened last month. This team is just not as talented as the ones that were winning more games than they were losing. And Von Miller knows that. And they've had multiple coaches. And maybe this has to do a little bit with Miller's frustration with Elway. Maybe it's a little bit to do with frustrations potentially with Vic Fangio. I go back to the story that Jason La Canfora broke a few weeks back that a lot of people wanted to dismiss. And I don't think you can dismiss it. Because where there's smoke, there's fire. And Fangio, as a guy that's been a D coordinator for the longest time, we all know how much he hated being down on the sidelines. He wanted to be up in the booth. I think if he could head coach from the booth, he'd do it. But that also means that one of the things you don't have a lot of experience in when it comes to in-game is dealing with players. You get to be maybe good cop, bad cop when you're a coordinator. You can't do that when you're the head coach. You're the guy. You're the one who has to answer all the questions. You're the one who sets the tone. You have to deal with all these people. And I think there probably is something to the fact that Fangio is learning on the fly how to deal with people in ways that he hasn't had to before. And Von Miller's been put in situations on defense where sometimes it's probably fair to say, did that make sense? Did you need him out covering the flat, wide, regularity? With regularity, you need him chasing tight ends as often as he is. And I understand the idea. We hear about it. But Fangio's a tough coach. He's a football guy. It's tough love. He's trying to make him better. Well, you know what? Not every player needs that. Von Miller's been a happy-go-lucky guy. He hasn't really needed to be complained about in public to be successful, has he? I would say his career to this point has been pretty good. So the idea that all of a sudden this year Von Miller got what? You're going to pretend that's the first coach that's ever wanted Von Miller to be at his best? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This is a fascinating scenario, and I think it might be a little bit more about Vic Fangio than people think. John Elway's been there the entire time. And they've managed to make it work. At this point, John Elway and Von Miller know who each other are, and whether they're buddies off the field, who cares? It's been a productive working relationship. There's no other way around that. And none of their personality traits are new. The new part of the equation is Fangio when it comes to Von Miller. And it may very well be just coincidence that you hear Von Miller talk like this when the new changes this year really Fangio, his defense. He calls the plays on defense, and he's the head coach. It seems to me as if there might be something to that. The first thing Fangio comes out and says today down at Dove Valley, I'm sure he was just speaking about that game or other years. And now, of course, Vic Fangio is not going to say, well, he might have been talking about me a little bit. But you have to consider it because it's a process of elimination. The easy thing to do is say, oh, he's frustrated with John Elway because his mom complained about him on Instagram earlier in the year. But Elway and Miller already know each other. And they've already gone through the bad times. Remember when Miller cropped Elway out of an Instagram. That was years ago. They got past it. They know who each other are at this point. Maybe that is it. Maybe they've been together so long it's frustrating. But I don't know if it necessarily is. Because Elway isn't what changed this season. We'll find out if the Broncos' record changes in the next couple of games. Brandon Stokley and Zach By discussed this very topic earlier today. And Stokley had a very different take than I did from a player's perspective. And I want you to hear it because I don't know if there's a right or it's wrong because neither one of us is in Von Miller's head. But it's an interesting perspective to hear, and he makes some very cogent points that are worth listening to. We'll hear from Brandon Stokley next. Following the Broncos' 23-3 loss to the Chiefs in Kansas City, one that officially eliminated them from the playoffs, not that that was in any doubt after the first 4 games of the year. But obviously done now. Von Miller, who is tied for the team lead in sacks with 7 for him, a somewhat underwhelming total in what's been a somewhat underwhelming year. Now, there have been a lot of injuries on the Broncos side of the defensive side of the ball, and I think that has factored into it, naturally. And who knows? Over the last 2 games, would it surprise you if Von Miller got 3 sacks and then he ends up with 10 sacks, double digits again, and we're not freaking out about it? Did everyone get worried about it in 2017 season when Miller had 10 sacks? Or even the 2015 season, Super Bowl season, he had 11. It's not really as bad a season as everyone makes it out to be for Miller. It's not good, but he doesn't have the help. Derek Wolfe is out. Bradley Chubb's been out. The Broncos had a mess all over their defensive line until they stabilized it by moving Shelby Miller to the end and putting in Mike Purcell. So there are other factors at work here. But if Miller goes and gets a couple more sacks in the last 2 games, and he ends up with 10 sacks in 15 games, better than his 2017 campaign. No one was going bonkers there. But Miller sounded almost despondent following the Broncos' loss. Earlier today on Stokley and Zach, Brandon Stokley didn't particularly care for it and gave his reasons as to why. This is the Broncos' 9th straight loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. And this year in the 2 games that they played, they were pummeled both times. I get where Stokley's at because some things he brings up are exactly right. Look, the Broncos have won 2 of 3, including the biggest win of the season in Houston. But then you get this performance in which they were double-digit underdogs, not expected to win. You hoped you were going to play better than you played. You'd hope that you weren't going to lose by 20. But if you lose by 10 or by 20, what's the real big difference? You go on the road against a team that's much better than you and you lose. Okay, big deal. I think Stoke was right. That's a small setback, not a big one. So that leads me to believe that what Miller's talking about isn't this game. He's talking about something bigger than that. He's talking about the frustration of probably losing to the Chiefs 9 straight times. They haven't beat them in years. Anywhere. And I think he looks at this season And he probably sees the missed opportunities, bad clock management in 3 different games this year that might have been wins had the coaching been better, had the execution been better. He knows that Chris Harris, longtime running mate, is on his way out. Maybe Derek Wolfe, too. And for Miller, I think there is a lot for him to look at and go, I wonder if this really is going to be better. And I do, too, because you look at especially, try to look at it from Von Miller's perspective. Chris Harris Jr. goes. Who replaces him? Your number one cornerback is Bryce Callahan. Bryce Callahan hasn't played a down that counts for the Denver Broncos. But he'd be your top guy the second Chris Harris leaves. Who replaces Derek Wolfe? Okay, say, maybe Shelby Harris. Except Shelby Harris is probably leaving too. Shelby Harris would like to get paid. And he's having the right year at the right time. So it's whom? DeMarcus Walker? Rookie Draymond Jones? Miller's watching his teammates, of which he's had success with, potentially all leave. And if that happens, knowing that there's nothing behind him, I get why he's down. And if he doesn't necessarily believe in the head coach, that might have a lot to do with it. There are things about Fangio. The Lock and Four article is part of it. There's another thing that I alluded to yesterday on the Fan Football postgame. Maybe we'll dig into that a bit. But this Broncos defense, 2 weeks ago, in Houston, lined Von Miller up over left tackle Laramie Tunsil and had extraordinary success. Went back to being over right tackle, in this case Mitchell Schwartz, a guy that Miller has repeatedly said gives him as much problem as anyone in the league. You know Von Miller can go over left tackle because you just saw him do it last week, and he was great. As the Broncos just keep getting dissected, Vic Fangio, defensive guru, changed nothing. Nothing. Maybe try moving Von Miller around. No. Maybe do something to not leave the middle of the field wide open. No. Dial up the blitzes a little bit more. No. And this has been a constant for the Broncos defense under Fangio. They come up with one game plan for that game, and that's what happens. The situation in the game doesn't change it. And we can talk more about that. But if I notice it, and hopefully you notice it, you better believe Von Miller notices it. And if I'm Von Miller, and I know that those teammates are leaving, and I know that my new head coach calls me out all the time while gives a bunch of lesser players a free pass. Hey, Garrett Bowles. How you feeling emotionally, Juwan James? If I'm Von Miller, I'm pretty sick of it. And I may not believe that things are going to change. And I'd be frustrated too. I understand. And you know what? I think Von Miller's done enough for this franchise that he deserves to be able to say it. Tonight on Monday Night Football, saw some things that had never happened before. Our stat of the night is next. Well, we don't have to go very far for our stat of the night. Well, it's this guy. Courtesy of Westwood One, of course, Kevin Harlan on the call. Drew Brees breaks Peyton Manning's record and goes beyond it to become the all-time leader in touchdown passes. That's not the stat of the night, though. Because even though Brees has that record, Tom Brady's only a few behind him. Might go back and forth a couple times. He also completed 29 of 30 passes, 96.7%. That's a new record. But our stat of the night is even more unbelievable than that, because not only does Drew Brees have the all-time touchdown record now, he has the all-time passing yards record as well, and he leads all quarterbacks in career completion percentage among qualifying players, of course. Cortland Sutton, for example, with his one pass this year, doesn't count. So he holds basically the three most important records, right? Passing yards, completion percentage, and yardage, and touchdowns. Those three. That's only happened once in a long time. That was in 1952 when Hall of Famer, rather legendary quarterback, Sammy Baugh finished his last season. He was the last man to hold all three of those records simultaneously. Completion percentage, passing yards, and touchdowns. At the time, in 1952, completion percentage was 56.5 for his career. He threw for 21,886 yards and 187 touchdowns. And all three of those were NFL records at the time. Drew Brees, 67 years later, is the first person to match that. That is bonkers. The numbers that Drew Brees has put up in his career are almost, they're mind-boggling. And you figure, when you put it all together, you think of his career, first pick in the second round. The Chargers move on from him after he gets hurt against the Denver Broncos on a sack that was right near the goal line. Gets a bad injury to his throwing arm, bounces back with that career, and easily becomes the best player to ever play for the New Orleans Saints. Drew Brees will never buy a drink ever in New Orleans. Don't worry about it. But you think about his numbers compared to Brady, and I do understand that Brady originally had to sit basically for 1 year behind Drew Bledsoe, but it's not like he sat the majority of his career. Brady's 2 years older than Brees. Brees will turn 41 in just about a month, January 15th. And those numbers, 67.5% career completion percentage. By the way, the last time he finished a year under 70% was 2015. 76,577 yards coming into the game, and then 537 touchdowns, now 541 touchdowns. I don't know what's crazier, what he's accomplished or the fact that all these are eventually going to be broken. Because we went over Baugh's numbers and you realize that that's not going to last forever. The league continues to become an offensive league that is tilted towards the quarterbacks. Virtually every rule change that happens benefits the quarterbacks. So it's definitely a golden age for quarterbacks. I don't know if it's the best quarterback era you've ever seen, but it's certainly the best era to play in if you are a quarterback. I take nothing away from Brees, who by all accounts, besides being a superlative player and has been for his entirety of his career, is apparently a very good teammate and a pretty good dude. Haven't heard a lot of people talk too badly about Drew Brees. So, remarkable moment tonight. Entertaining to watch, to listen to. Fun week in the NFL. Lot of games were entertaining. A lot of them were significant. But for the Broncos, as I've been calling it, the 2020 preseason continues. And looking at what the Broncos need to do, there's only so much they can do this season. And that's one of the biggest problems about this entire Broncos season. You can say what you will about Vic Fangio, whether it's been impressive or not. You can say what you will about Rich Scangarello or any of the coaches you'd like. But this roster was never good enough to compete. It's not deep enough, and it's just not good enough. Now, there are certain young players that seem to be forming something of a nucleus that's pretty exciting to build around. I'm not all gloom and doom here because I'll tell you what I predicted. It's right up here stuck on the wall. The Broncos at 7-9. I think the Broncos are still going to finish 7-9. I didn't think they'd make the playoffs at all. So, quite frankly, they're doing about what I expected. I didn't think Joe Flacco had much left in the tank. He didn't. I thought they needed to get in Drew Lock as soon as possible. Well, they didn't do that either. But they really only got him in a couple games later than I wanted to see him. And they're going to get a good long look at him. And already, I think Drew Lock, despite yesterday's game, looks like an NFL quarterback to me. I really don't look at Drew Lock and think, wow, the Broncos have to go with a quarterback in the first round this year. I don't think so anymore. After 3 weeks, I don't think they do. A whole offseason with the team, the Broncos knowing that this guy is their starter. I think there's better things to come. I always have to preface it because if you say anything nice about Drew Lock, people freak out and think that you're saying he's going to be the best quarterback ever. I will quote Vic Fangio and say I'm not trying to put him in Canton. Do I think he's good enough to be your starting quarterback in 2020? Yes, I do. I think you have things you've learned on offense. You have two running backs that, again, maybe not top of the top, but as a unit, can be pretty effective. You have a very good Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver. You have a rookie tight end that, again, looks like he's going to stick in this league. You can see the talent, and if he really puts it together, the ceiling is pretty high. But this team and the idea that it's going to be this defense first, defense second, it's not sustainable. And I don't know if they have the right coach. But he's not changing. The Broncos in these last couple games have a lot to learn about themselves. One of those things they need to learn is how to stop a tight end. We'll take a look at how the tight ends performed against the Broncos. It's alarming. I'll show you next. I know the game happened yesterday. I get it. But it feels like between yesterday and today, Travis Kelce might have caught a couple more passes. I mean, the Broncos have had, we know this, of course. Get all that. But the Broncos have had a really tough time over the years when it comes to stopping tight ends. And these guys tend to chew up a lot of yards on the Broncos. Now, I do get it. I get that they're very tough guys to defend. And the Broncos, truthfully, have not given up very many touchdown passes this year to tight ends. That part's pretty good. But they do give up an average of 6 catches and 60 yards against tight ends. The opposing tight ends do that every year. Or at least every game this year. Right now, they're surrendering 60 yards a game and 6 catches. Obviously, Kelce yesterday easily outpaced that with 11 for 142. But for the Broncos, that's not very good. They allow the 6th most yards to tight ends. And obviously, I think you need to be very concerned about that. It's not new. This is something that is a consistent, regular problem for the Broncos. Todd Davis had an impossible time with it. And I get it. I preface this with saying I understand that Travis Kelce is the exception rather than the rule. I do get it. But this has just been a consistent problem for the Broncos, and in a division in which every other team in your division has good tight ends. This has got to be something that the Broncos need to fix. Other teams know it. The Broncos defense gets targeted 8 times a game on average to the tight end. There are only 3 teams that get 9. One of them, oddly, is the Chiefs. The other 2 are the Vikings and the Seahawks, in part just because getting downfield on those guys, given their corners, is pretty tricky. But when it comes to the success rate there, it's really pretty alarming. The Broncos, basically an average quarterback, will throw at his tight end 8 times and complete 6 of them. They have great success. That you can do the math there. 6 out of 8. 75%. The Broncos are allowing the 5th most targets to tight ends in the league and allowing a 75% completion rate to tight ends. Yesterday, it was 87% complete to tight ends. This is a consistent problem for the Broncos, and one that I'm not sure that they can do anything with if they continue to go with their current starters of Todd Davis and Alexander Johnson. The problem is there's definitely no one better. We know the answer isn't Josie Jewell. So where do they go? This is still a position of need for the Broncos, isn't it? There are more than a few positions of need here. And in order, I believe they're offensive line, defensive line, cornerback, inside linebacker, and then wide receiver. Your mileage may vary, of course. But I think that's where it is. This team has to find a way to stop tight ends. It is not their highest priority. Their highest priority should be to build both the offensive and defensive lines. That's what's got to happen. Because both of those are underwhelming, and they'll be worse after certain free agents leave, on the defensive side specifically. Connor McGovern, by the way, is an unrestricted free agent at center. I think the Broncos will probably re-sign him. I hope they re-sign him and put him back at guard after they move on from Ron Leary, which you expect would happen. But when it comes to defending the tight end, you have Hunter Henry, you have Darren Waller, and you have Travis Kelce. None of those guys are going anywhere. They're all in their primes. The Broncos can no longer just sleep on this and expect to be successful. ESPN's Todd McShay had his first mock draft. And, mock drafts are what they are. Take them with a grain of salt because you don't know where teams are going to pick yet. There's 2 more weeks. And I suspect the Broncos might win their next 2. So they'll go down. But as it stands right now, the Broncos are picking 12th, if it was today. And Todd McShay has them picking safety Grant Delpit at LSU. Now, quite frankly, I don't mind that because I do think safety may become a need if and when Justin Simmons leaves. Now, Justin Simmons may want to move on. I think, however, one of the interesting things to look at is the idea that he could be franchise tagged. The Broncos are trying to get it done. That's one of the reasons, reportedly, that they extended Joe Flacco's contract in an effort to free up the money available to try to sign some of their guys. They did with Andy Janovich. You could do that, I guess, with Justin Simmons, but the franchise tag would be $13.6 million. 13.6. That is an awful lot of money to pay to a safety regardless. When you are already paying your other safety big time money, because next year Kareem Jackson still gets a pretty good chunk of change. Jackson jumps from a $6 million cap hit to a $14 million cap hit. Do you want to pay $28 million to your 2 starting safeties? I'll be completely honest. I really like Justin Simmons. I like him on and off the field. I'm not convinced that's a particularly good investment. Have to find a way to get better corners. If Chris Harris leaves, or more accurately, when Chris Harris leaves, you have Bryce Callahan, and who knows how he'll be injury-wise. Callahan was a number 3 receiver and an occasional slot guy, being asked to move to the outside and being a starting cover corner for the first time in his career in the pros. Don't know what he was going to be able to do or not, because he never played it down for the Broncos this year, and he's not going to. So you're going with Bryce Callahan, assuming he can be healthy, and whom? Has Devontae Harris shown you enough? The Broncos aren't even starting him anymore. They're starting Isaac Yiadom. Isaac Yiadom has shown me enough. Shows me enough that he shouldn't be starting. I don't think Duke Dawson Jr., I guess, maybe there's a ceiling there. Maybe you could work with him if you get him in the entire offseason. He was a second-round pick. Of course, he was a second-round pick that the Patriots were happy to just get rid of. Well, maybe there's something there. I think Dawson and Harris are players that can make this roster. But I look at it and think if Bryce Callahan and Devontae Harris are starting cornerbacks of the Denver Broncos are in a heap of trouble. And by the way, you don't need 2 starting cornerbacks in today's NFL because nickel packages oftentimes really are your base package. You need 3. The Broncos have 1 that has at least done some things at the NFL level in Bryce Callahan. He hasn't done it for them yet. But after Chris Harris leaves, that's who they got. That's it. That's a little scary. looking at the Broncos pass coverage, I've talked about the inflexibility of the Broncos defensive play calls under Vic Fangio. After they were burned early on by Tyreek Hill, and again, a lot of people get burned by Tyreek Hill. Let's not go crazy about it. What did they do? Did it work? Is it a pattern for something that teams could use to beat the Broncos going forward? We'll discuss that next. Early in the Broncos' loss, obviously you saw it. The Chiefs hit early. Snow was coming down pretty good. It was a very telegenic game. I love watching snowy football games. I love them. They just look so great on TV.
They're fun to go to as well.
Yeah, as long as you're dressed right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't wear shorts.
Yeah.
Don't wear just a hoodie. Got to pack it in.
And preferably, I remember going to the AFC Championship game against Pittsburgh that they lost, and it was cold, and it was snowing, and I had a loud Steelers fan behind me, then spilled his beer. Then it's not so fun.
Yeah.
So now you're freezing, got a wet beer down your back, team's losing, not so great. But they look great on TV. Chiefs open up the scoring with that 41-yard touchdown pass from Patrick Mahomes to Tyreek Hill. And it looked like Harris kind of knew Chris Harris right off the bat, because he immediately started to signal behind him, even as they lined up, sort of warning Justin Simmons, hold on a minute. I might need help. I might need a hand. And the problem with that, and yeah, people were going bonkers on the text line yesterday about it. On the fan football post game I was hosting, and most of it was, wow, Chris Harris is terrible. Okay, Chris Harris is not terrible. Tyreek Hill is the fastest player in the NFL. As a wide receiver, he knows where he's going. As a defender, you don't. Part of the problem with that particular situation is, early in the game, it's still slippery. If Tyreek Hill makes his cut cleanly, Chris Harris is toast. Now it's just about Mahomes hitting the target, which he does. And that's it. Just dropped it in right behind Harrison Simmons, and it kind of felt like the race was on there. The Broncos did play a little more of the zone after that. The zone, in many ways, is Vic Fangio's preference anyway. I'm not sure the Broncos are absolutely best suited to it, but they did make the slight change. But obviously, the zone has its own problems too. Massive problems. Mainly, once you find the seams in the zone and the holes in the zone, a la Travis Kelce, you're open all day long. The problem is, once the Broncos made that change, they didn't really do anything else. And so Mahomes is able to complete 79.4% of his passes. And when he goes to Kelce or back up Blake Bell, 86.7% completion. The Broncos normally give up, as I went over, 75% completion to tight ends, which is atrocious. But the Broncos, to me, under Vic Fangio, and I say this knowing it hardly matters, because Vic Fangio is not going anywhere. The Broncos could get blown out of the water at home versus Detroit and to Oakland and finish with 5 wins. And Vic Fangio will still be here. John Elway does not want the reputation to be a coach killer. He ran out John Fox when John Fox was a winner. Now, it worked out. I'm not knocking the decision, but to the outside looking in, it looks a little strange. Gary Kubiak leaves for health issues. That's one thing, but then could have returned as an offensive coordinator on this staff, and he and Elway couldn't get things squared away, and it ended on bad terms. In the meanwhile, Elway hired Vance Joseph, who was not ready for the job. After sleeping on it, literally, that's what Elway said, he slept on it, brought him back for a second year, which was only slightly better than the year prior. Now you bring in Vic Fangio, and I wouldn't say that the team's exactly been gangbusters. Now, I'm going to make the same argument in Fangio's defense I've made in Vance Joseph's defense. This roster that Elway has compiled is not built to compete at the NFL level on the playoff level. It's not deep enough. It's not talented enough. Now, in the last 2 years, the drafting, I think, has been dramatically improved, and you're starting to see the results of that. But I'm not sure when Rich Scangarello gets all the flack when it comes to the play calling, right? Play calling. There's defensive play calls too. And it feels to me as if the Broncos have been rather uninspired. That they don't seem to change very much within game. When it gets away from the Broncos, it gets away. This is one of those teams where it has felt like all season long, when the Broncos start to feel it slip, it just the ground crumbles beneath their feet. And that's sort of what Von Miller was alluding to after the game. So going forward, I do wonder, why has there not been the same kind of scrutiny applied to the Broncos defense as there is to the Broncos offense? And honestly, I don't know why, except for it's easy to blame it on Scangarello because people don't even know what he looks like. And I think there is a certain segment of the fan base that goes, well, I also don't want to think for a second that the Broncos picked the wrong coach again. And I don't know if that's the case or not. But I know that coming into the season, everybody knew. Everybody knew. The Broncos were more than happy to bet their season on it again. Their defense was more talented than their offense. Everybody knew that. That is no secret whatsoever. So if you knew the Broncos were going to have a bad defense or a bad offense, but you were going to rely on your great defense, shouldn't that defense be great? The Broncos are 10th in points allowed at 20.3. That's not disastrous, I suppose. In yards per game, they're a little worse. They're 12th. In passing yards per game, they are 10th again. So this is an upper third defense, I suppose. In the rush, they're in the bottom third. Broncos are allowing 114 a game on the ground. So I look at the defense, I'm like, all right, it's an upper third. My question would be, did you think it was going to be that with or without Vic Fangio? Because when you look at this team, and when you look at the way this team played under Vance Joseph the year prior, you would expect there to be a much better improvement, right? A significant improvement under defensive guru Vic Fangio as opposed to inexperienced Vance Joseph, who ran a defense in Miami prior to joining the Broncos that was among the very worst in the league. Fangio has plenty of defenders, and we get many of them on the RamosLaw.com text line, 303-713-1043, and that's just fine. But the Broncos this year, as I pointed out, are allowing 20.3 points a game. This, by the way, with a new coach that is known as a defensive guru. Last year, they averaged 21.8 allowed. They're fewer than 2 points different. That's something. But it's not night and day. And it ranks the Broncos at roughly the same spot. That they're 10th in points allowed. They were 13th last year. So it's gotten a little better. When you look at yards per game, if that's the metric you prefer, and you'll notice teams basically pick the one that they're best at, and that's the metric they worry about. To my mind, it's points per game. But you want to go yards per game, that's fine too. The Broncos this year, as we pointed out, are 12th. Last year, they were worse than that. They were sitting in that 19 range. But the points per game, only 1.5 different. I guess I look at it from Fangio, and I understand they lost Bradley Chubb. That hurts. I get it. But they upgraded their safety position dramatically with Kareem Jackson. Once they got the line with Wolf and Harris on the ends, they got a lot better. They were a donut hole in the middle last year at inside linebacker. Now they found Alexander Johnson. Seems like it should be better to me. Maybe I'm wrong. RamosLaw.com text line is 303-713-1043. 13 years ago tonight. An interesting moment in Denver Nuggets history. Kind of entertaining in retrospect. Our time machine's next. All right, the date is 2006. The Denver Nuggets are starting off the season with a 13-9 record behind youthful star Carmelo Anthony. They're in Madison Square Garden, the mecca of basketball, on their way to a win, and then this happens. He did indeed end up missing a lot of games. You could hear that smack on the audio. Ooh. Ooh. Marty Collins ended up being actually okay somehow. I don't know. I would have been.
Started running after him and stuff.
Yeah.
I would have went.
Get
I would have
that
went
adrenaline.
sleep. I would have
Yeah.
went sleepy time.
Yeah. Night. Yeah. Would have been, I guess the adrenaline's working. But wow. That happened, in case you forgot, by the way, it happened with only 1:15 left in the game. It was basically over. Nuggets were up 119-100. And it felt a little bit like the fight was going to calm down, and then Melo and Collins got in it. Whew. That was over the air. Wow, that was a punch. The was kind of funny about it. Remember, only 2 years prior was that big, the Malice in the Palace, right? The Pacers and the Pistons. So that ended up being a huge deal. David Stern then said, quote, "It's our obligation to take the strongest steps possible to avoid such failures in the future." 7 different players got suspended for a total of 47 games, and those players lost $1.2 million combined in salary, and then each team took a $500,000 fine as well. Melo ended up getting the biggest suspension, 15 games. Since his was longer than 12, he was actually able to appeal it, but Melo did not actually appeal it, saying he didn't want to be a further distraction. You heard the sound. I don't think he was going to get it reduced anyway. So probably a good call on Melo's part. Probably going to get all 15 of that. J.R. Smith and then a future Nugget, Nate Robinson, then with the Knicks, each got 10 games. Marty Collins got 6 despite being clocked. Jared Jeffries got 4. Didn't Jared Jeffries end up on the Nuggets too at one point? Weird. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I'm thinking otherwise. Nene got a game as well as Jerome James. So there you go. No, Jeffries did not. I was thinking of someone else. Have a different Nuggets on my brain. But an interesting part of the game is that kind of gets glossed over, and there's only a minute and change left. Every player on the court at the time was ejected. All 10. Everybody. You're all out. They ejected every single person on the floor. Fortunately, of course, no fans got involved, which is what happened in the old Malice in the Palace. And what happened is basically the NBA there were plenty of writers at the time that argued that basically, because this wasn't nearly as bad as the one a couple years ago with the Pistons and the Pacers. Now, in that one, there was, it's basically enough. The NBA was trying to kind of make sure they were still worried about their image there after that big fight. And so many writers at the time basically said that the league overcompensated. And really ended up hitting these guys probably harder than they needed to be. Because at the time, remember, Carmelo, it's easy to forget, Carmelo Anthony was the leading scorer in the NBA at that time of the fight. Ahead of LeBron, ahead of Dwayne Wade, all those guys. Number one. At the time, people went a little crazy about it. Steve Kerr, who was then in an announcement time, said Anthony, quote, tarnished his image. Rick Booker said that he had torched his own career, was the quote. And Northwest Airlines, which I don't even think exists anymore, Anthony was on the cover of their in-flight magazine. They pulled all those out of all their airplanes. And basically, Carmelo Anthony was being used as kind of, he's the guy they scapegoated to make sure that this wasn't a fight again. That the league didn't have that kind of black eye, pun not intended. It changed Carmelo's perception for a while, but it seems like by the end, I think people kind of forgot about it. It was just, it was a fight. Happens sometimes in games. It's the way it goes. Nuggets went on to win 45 games that year and get the 6th seed in the playoffs. They were knocked off by the Spurs.
Well, another thing that I remember, Sean, is right after that, they had just gotten Allen Iverson. And then everyone...
It was a one day after the suspension came down.
Okay, perfect.
Yep, one day after.
And everyone in the NBA was so excited. All of us in town were so excited to see Carmelo and Iverson, but we had to wait 15 games.
Right.
To see that duo go head to head against other teams. Turned out to be fun though.
You know what? Here's some weird parts of it. So you go these players that had a back and forth, right? Nate Robinson then played with the Nuggets in 2013. Of course, Carmelo was then traded to the Knicks, famously, right? The J.R. Smith was signed by the Knicks in 2012. Marcus Camby joined the Knicks in 2012. And then in 2013, Kenyon Martin joined the Knicks. 4 members of the 2012 Knicks were on that Nuggets team that night. What a weird moment in history. Got that smack one more time? That was amazing. Oh. I only allow it because Marty Collins was fine. Somehow. Because he had a jaw made of titanium or something. Great find by Kevin Kister to start the research on that and find that audio. What a crazy, crazy moment. And you had 2 coaches in Isaiah Thomas and George Karl who didn't really have a lot of fondness for each other too. That kind of kickstarted the Nuggets in a way. I think it in the end it didn't really hurt them. I think it made them a tighter unit. Not suggesting that this current Nuggets team is a little wobbly here and there, necessarily gets in a fight. I wouldn't do that, but it's one way to look at it. Going back to the Broncos, we talk about the idea of their standard, right? The Broncos they're always in the hunt. They're going to compete now and from now on. That hasn't been the case in the last few years. How does that affect their own players? How does that affect guys around the league? This is going to be a critical offseason for the Denver Broncos, who finally seem like they are barely getting traction in the right direction. Does that standard mean anything anymore? What's the statute of limitations on it? We'll talk about that next. What do you think of when you think of the Denver Broncos? What's the first thing that springs to mind? The first thing that springs to mind is probably orange, the color orange, and then probably John Elway, to be totally honest. Unless you're Kevin Kistner, then it's Peyton Manning. But the other thing you think about is playoff wins, AFC championships, Super Bowls. These are the things that have by and large defined the Broncos. For most of Pat Bowlen's tenure as owner, the team went out of its way to point out how successful it had been. Winning percentage, playoff performances, and years in the playoffs, remarkable run. It really did, in many ways, define who the Denver Broncos were. The problem now, the Broncos do seem to be turning it around. They do have young talent. They do have young talent that might all mature at the same time. So all of that's pretty exciting. But since Super Bowl 50, the year after they got to 9-7, including that year, since their Super Bowl championship, they have won 40% of their games. That's a bad ratio. The crazier part of it is over the last three, they've won 35% of their games. To put that in another perspective, if over the last 3 years the Broncos were a baseball team, they would essentially be going 56 and 106 every year. That puts an idea of what that winning percentage is. You'd be a 106 loss team in baseball over the last 3 years if you were the Broncos. That's awful. If you were an NBA team, they'd be 28 and 54 every year. It's hard to actually put into words how bad the Broncos have been in their last 3 seasons. And part of the problem with this happening year in and year out, teams can weather it easier when your team has basically been having one bad year. Not that they were great back in that span. But from Mike Shanahan's final year through Josh McDaniels and into John Fox's first, the Broncos went 8-8, 8-8, 4-12, 8-8. Now, granted, that is the definition of mediocrity. But that 4-12 year to the outside looks like, all right, well, this is at least an average team. They're a middling team. They're in the playoff chase. They're interesting. And they had one crummy year. By and large, that's how the Broncos have been for their entire history in the NFL. We're talking about them having 3 straight losing seasons. That hasn't happened since 1972. If the Broncos lose one more game, it'll be the first time they've had 3 straight double-digit loss seasons since 1967, and they were part of the AFL then. Broncos have never had 3 straight double-digit losing seasons as an NFL franchise. Obviously, those are bad, but at what point does a down stretch actually become the trajectory of your franchise? The Broncos are desperate to change that, and they may very well be able to. But you're talking in the last 3 years, 3 different starting quarterbacks. 2 different coaches, including 3 over the last 4. Multiple lead running backs, multiple lead receivers. I mean, it's all over the place. The Broncos in the last 3 years have just been a team that rotates guys in and out with the exact same result. Now, under Pat Bowlen, they were better than that. Bolin ceded day-to-day operations some time ago. Under de facto owner Joe Ellis and John Elway, it hasn't quite been so consistent. And the problem when you look at someone like Justin Simmons, and maybe the Broncos, if they don't get a deal done, and why would they? Unless they're dramatically overpay. If you're Justin Simmons, of course you go to free agency. You can always go back to the Broncos. Of course you go to free agency and find out what you can get. If the Broncos choose to franchise him, it's going to be roughly $13.6 million. But to look at it, most Broncos fans look at it and say, this is a downstretch, right? It's just a bad run. It's a run that you haven't seen in 50 years, but it's just a bad run. The problem is if you're someone like Justin Simmons, who was drafted prior to the 2016 season, he has spent his entire career on a team that is 12 games below 500 and has never made the playoffs. He's been on a team that's been disastrous in his last 3. So Justin Simmons, despite being a Denver Bronco, doesn't look at the Denver Broncos the way most people look at the Denver Broncos. None of their young players do. To them, they've been drafted by a losing team, and they're looking to get out of it. And maybe not to leave the Broncos, but they're tired of the losing. They watch the star players that maybe they were watching in college, Von Miller, Chris Harris, Derek Wolfe, Emmanuel Sanders, Demaryius Thomas. You watch them all go away. This is a dangerous offseason for the Broncos. When these losing seasons continue, year after year after year, not only does it make your own players harder to retain, but it becomes pretty difficult to recruit free agents. It's very hard to get people to come to your team. The Browns had a blip coming into this season because there was some belief in Baker Mayfield. Now, as the Browns start to fall apart, people go, yep, same old Browns. It's going to be hard for the Browns to get talent again. It's a critical offseason for them, too. But for the Broncos, you have a first-year head coach. You're going to have a bad record once again. If you're a top-tier free agent, if you're one of the elite free agents on the market, assuming that you just are going to do anything at all except just go for the cash, and certainly people will do that. But if you're just going to do more than go for the cash, let's say you're someone in their prime that looking for the big money. Let's say you're Dante Fowler Jr. Let's say you're Jadeveon Clowney. Why are you coming to the Broncos? The Broncos have to turn this around in pretty short order, and they have to do it for that exact reason. It becomes a very tough sales pitch. You can't keep going and say, hey, remember, we won the Super Bowl 4 seasons ago, 5 seasons ago. Teams go, yeah, but what have you been since then? You're awful. The Broncos are in more danger than maybe they realize. I think they are trending in the right direction. I really do. But you need things to speed up. Because at this stage, the Broncos need a lot of pieces. This is a shallow team. You get less shallow, you're going to have to draft well, and you have to sign some free agents. Ones that are good. Ones that can play for you, not guys with injury histories. The last two games of this season will go a long way towards proving it. They go win these last 2 games with Drew Lock, with a young quarterback that you can believe in, Broncos have something. The loss to the Chiefs doesn't change that narrative. Everyone knew that team was better than the Broncos. These next 2 games, Broncos have to find a way to get it done. Great performances in sports all around this weekend. We love collecting them for you. We'll do so on our Weekend Warriors next. That's right. It's time for our Weekend Warriors. Kevin and I go through the sports world over the weekend. And yeah, you know what? We count Friday. We count Monday. It's sort of loosely put together the weekend. Go find the people that stood out for us. We'll start that right out with Kevin's choice for number 4.
Yeah, Sean, I'm going to go with the Arizona Cardinals running back, Kenyon Drake. 22 carries, 137 yards, but 4 touchdowns on the ground. That blew me away as they went on to beat the Browns in yesterday's game. 4 rushing touchdowns. I mean, that's unheard of anymore.
Really, I mean, the record is 5. It's still 5 in a game, so it's right there. And the idea that Kenyon Drake, who is basically just given up on in Miami, all of a sudden finds new life in an offense. And remember, David Johnson was not long ago considered one of the best running backs in the league, or at least one of the best up-and-coming running backs in the league. He's been an afterthought. He's healthy, by the way. They just don't use him because Kenyon Drake's getting the job done.
I haven't even heard his name all year.
And why would you at this point? 137 yards and 4 touchdowns in a game? He won a lot of people's fantasy leagues, didn't they? If they were smart enough to play him.
That's how I came across the stat. I was looking through fantasy scores. I'm like, oh my gosh, that guy put up a lot of points. Oh my God, he had 4 touchdowns.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay.
Crazy speed, crazy agility, a really phenomenal college running back, and he just couldn't put it together. And maybe it was more Miami that was the issue than Drake, because he seems to have found a home in Arizona. It's interesting, though, because he is scheduled for free agency. I think he's a restricted free agent. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but that's talk about getting it at the right time. But a lot of people thought at the time when Arizona made that trade, like, what are they doing? Why are you giving up for this guy? He's terrible, and he's going to leave at the end of the year anyway. Well, maybe not. Ring the bell. I'm going to go to the next round. That would be Denver Nuggets center Nikola Jokic, who is now looking more engaged, looking better, looking sharper. Still doesn't look entirely in shape. But then again, when you can go take on the Thunder, like the Nuggets did on Saturday, and go for 28, 14, and 12 while only missing 3 shots, well, you do you. That's what Nikola Jokic did in the Nuggets' 110-102 win. 11 for 14 from the field, including 3 for 6 for three-pointers. So if you're doing the math, Nikola Jokic did not miss a 2-point attempt at all. And he's a 7-foot center who went 50% from the 3-point line. Yeesh. 28 points, 14 rebounds, 12 assists on the night, threw in a steal for good measure. Whew, plus 15, by far the best player on the floor. If Jokic gets himself back in the groove, the Denver Nuggets will follow him. One of the drawbacks of getting a superstar is that team revolves around that guy. If Jokic plays more like that, I mean, you don't need 28, 14, and 12 from him, but you get that kind of effort, Nuggets will be right back at it. Ring it.
All right, my guy, a pretty easy one for the weekend since there wasn't much going on. But Joe Burrow wins the Heisman Trophy. I know he was the favorite and all that stuff, but this is a guy who transferred from Ohio State because he gets beat out by Justin Fields, who got beat out by Jake Fromm. A little circle there,
right.
Circus. But he goes out and complete 77.9% of his passes this year. 4,700 yards, 48 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, and is expected to be the first overall pick to the Bengals.
He's an Ohio kid?
And he's an Ohio kid, so it kind of lines up perfectly for him. But this is a guy, I mean, Sean, are you sold on him moving forward?
I am.
In the
I mean,
NFL?
I'm not sure he's going to be some sort of super-duper star necessarily, but I do. Look, when a guy makes that much of a change from one year to year, it's very easy to say, okay, something fluky happened. Except you go watch his games. He doesn't look like a fluke. The stats are all there, and you watch him, and he passes the eye test. Some of the challenges with college athletes, and especially college quarterbacks, and evaluating it is, remember, you're talking about guys that are 20, 21 years old. Think of when you were that age, and I know you're not that far from it, Kevin, but at the same time, you really can undergo huge changes in that span of time.
Yeah.
Your mentality changes. The idea of what you need to do changes. Your work ethic changes. And so when you see Joe Burrow do what he's done all year, yeah, I think he's for real. He's a no-brainer number one pick in the draft.
And the thing that has got me questioning him is that he increases completion percentage by 20%. To me, there's something there. And what they did is they brought in their offensive coordinator or passing games coordinator. He was with the Saints last year.
Right.
And I think that made the biggest difference. So to me, I want to see how he adjusts from this college offense to Zach Taylor's offense with the Bengals. Is Zach Taylor smart? He's going to have a job for the next 15 years with the Bengals.
Yeah, as long as because if they end up with Joe Burrow and Joe Burrow succeeds, why would you change horses?
Can't do it.
It's a great situation, I think, for really everyone involved there. I'm looking forward to seeing how he performs in this college football playoff. Go ahead and ring it. Number one weekend warrior. He comes from tonight. You want to guess who it is?
Michael Thomas.
You could make the argument. Tell you one thing about Michael Thomas, actually, crazy stat. If you go to the NFL's Next Gen Stats, the catch percentage on average for Michael Thomas's catches tonight, he ended up basically having about a 65% on that. But what happened in it is just crazy. Michael Thomas, when Drew Brees threw to him tonight, 12 for 12. Expected catch percentage on Michael Thomas's 12 targets, 64.5% according to Next Gen Stats. Well, caught 100% of them. That 35.5% improved catch percentage is the most in a game over the last 3 years in the NFL. But he's not the guy that threw it. The guy that threw it was Drew Brees. He went 29 for 30 tonight, 307 yards, 4 picks, no interceptions, set a new record for completion percentage in a game. His 25th game of throwing 4 touchdowns and no picks. Oh, and passed Peyton Manning for the most touchdown passes in history. Yeah, I think that counts as our number one weekend warrior.
How can it not? I mean, when you break an all-time record, and is this kind of the equivalent to Barry Bonds breaking the home run record?
Well, it's certainly football's equivalent because it's such an easy number to get to. I mean, the yards is sort of a harder one to wrap your head around and all that. So I think, yeah, basically it is. I mean, the point scoring, right? For quarterbacks,
yeah.
For quarterbacks, that's the home run record. Sure. What
And-
point of the game to score touchdowns?
And it's so historic because we saw Brett Favre do it. I don't even remember
Joe
Brett
Montana
Favre
held it
breaking
for a long time.
Yeah, I don't even remember Brett Favre breaking it, to be honest with you. And then when Peyton broke it in 2014, it was like, oh, man, this is like really historic. And now we're seeing Drew Brees breaking it tonight. He played 7
Peyton
more
Manning
games.
might be third
by Saturday.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, might be third.
And I'll be honest, I didn't think anyone was going to touch the record. I didn't think it was going to be broken until Andrew Luck would have broken it if he was still playing, Patrick Mahomes. And then I just did not think Tom Brady or Drew Brees would have lasted this long.
Yeah, and I think that's the trick. I mean, offenses, it's built for that. I get that. But otherwise, yeah, it's impressive. It's impressive. This has been fun. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, following Cecil Lammy's program, like we usually do, 9 to midnight. Thanks for tuning in. Kevin Kistner in the booth. I'm Sean Drotar. You can follow me on Twitter at SDrotar, SDROTAR. We'll catch you tomorrow right here, The Fan Late Night, Sports Radio 104.3 The Fan.